Welcome to another episode of the F.O.R.C.E podcast. I am FIBA CEO and President David Schwartz. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the FIBA on Risk and Compliance Excellence, otherwise known as the F.O.R.C.E podcast. Today's topic will be human trafficking. How can financial institutions be part of the solution? You know, there's a public misconception, which we see famously portrayed in movies and film, that human trafficking is all about sex, forced prostitution, and that's where it ends. And while that might be one form of this crime, it goes far beyond that. Looking at some statistics that were compiled by the United Nations International Labor Organization, human traffickers victimize an estimated 27.6 million people worldwide. It's a staggering number. And interestingly enough, 77% of all victims are in forced labor, with 23% being in sex trafficking. So it kind of reverses that public misconception that's out there. And trafficking networks often span multiple countries. They use sophisticated financial structures that make tracing funds difficult. And there's limited enforcement capacity. There's a lack of training, political will in some areas, and evolution of technology like crypto that we're seeing not just in the area of money laundering, but also here in other crimes. So financial institutions play a critical role. Most often, they're not aware that they play a critical role in processing the movement of the illicit proceeds from these criminal acts. So best practices are emerging. There are people that are working very hard and diligently toward that. And we're going to hear more about that from our guests. So today, we're going to discuss this trend with Rani Hong, a human trafficking survivor and a leading voice in the fight against modern-day slavery, and founder of Freedom Detective, a new solution to fight human trafficking, plus scams, fraud, more, which she's going to tell us about. And my good friend, John Tobon, former Assistant Director for Homeland Security Investigations, who's been a fixture at our FIBA events throughout the years. He's an expert in financial crimes and money laundering for much of his career. And he's been part of multiple large cartel busts and was there for the arrest of some of the most notorious drug lords. So Rani, John, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
Yes.
So Rani, as I mentioned, you are a victim and a survivor of forced labor trafficking, which, as I emphasized, is really where the majority of this trafficking is taking place. You know, if you could share with us some of the details of the terrible odyssey that you went through.
Well, good afternoon, David, and thank you for having me on the show, and look forward to educating your audience about what does human trafficking look like. And so, as you know, there is a human cost to the financial crime of child trafficking because I lived it. And as a child, I was basically trafficked and really kind of reduced to transactions and making a profit for my traffickers. You see, I was raised in southern India, and at the age of 7 is when I got kidnapped and then sold into human trafficking. My traffickers literally was just seeing the profit sign, profit dollars and profits, and all in exploiting me as a child. So I was actually sold across state borders to another state where I did not know the language. I didn't know anyone there. And I was just, we're talking about a 7-year-old little girl just being used as a commodity, right? We know that human trafficking and traffickers see people and children as a commodity, and then they exploit us. So in my case, that's what happened. And the good news, of course, I was later trafficked again for international adoption into the United States. And human trafficking, the crime itself is a business, and it doesn't really see borders. So my trafficking network didn't see me as a child. They saw me something as a commodity that could be transferred, transported, across international borders, Canada, and then into the United States. And so today, I speak on this issue widely to raise awareness about this issue. And I think this is the opportunity we have with your audience. So thank you for having me here.
No, thank you. Thank you, Rani, and thank you for sharing that. John, as I said, you've been a crime fighter, shall we say, for many years, a great career at HSI. And, just like with all types of crimes and criminals, there's no single profile of what is a human trafficker. And I think, Rani expressed that when she alluded to the fact that it's a business, a commodity. Can you try and help us understand, who are these people and what is their motivation?
Yeah, I think, the real challenge when it comes to trafficking, first of all, as you mentioned, a lot of the attention and focus goes towards sex trafficking, which allows people to say, well, I don't do that, and to create that distance so that their world is very far away from both the victim and the victimizers in that type of activity. People don't often think of labor trafficking. And I think, Ronnie's story illustrates a couple of points that I think, potentially bring that world closer to everyday people, right? You're talking about labor trafficking and where that occurs, the profit motive that goes behind that. But, Ronnie also mentioned international adoption. That is an area where, more and more as information is gained, we see that a lot of the individuals that thought they were doing something, or maybe they were doing something for an altruistic reason, wanted to do it so much that they said, well, the regular process is too convoluted, so let me go here. And so really, when you're trying to figure out what is it that that is in the makeup of an individual that would get involved in trafficking, you can really boil it down to somebody who is looking for some type of advantage, whether it's a physical advantage over another person, whether it's a commercial advantage in the production, in the supply chain of actual commodities, or an advantage to get something that will make them feel better, that they feel, that they're doing for an altruistic reason. And, some of this happens wittingly. Other people do it unwittingly, and other people just, go into the don't ask, don't tell mode. And so I think those are the sort of like the three buckets that I see. But ultimately, it comes down to somebody who's looking for some type of an advantage, even if that ultimate end on its face has a beneficial or is for a good purpose.
Interesting, and as you said, it reinforces, what Rani said. Initially trafficked for labor, and then put into this adoption scenario. Rani, as a result of all that, you've made it your life's mission to educate people, businesses, consumers, about modern day slavery. What is it? How does it take place? What to watch out for? And the idea, of course, is to try and eradicate this terrible crime. But, as John and I have had many conversations just about money laundering, we always seem to be a couple of steps behind the criminals. So what are some of the initiatives that you have undertaken to try and get us a little bit closer to eliminating this crime?
Well, yes, I think as all of us, as good people, good citizens, we want to do the right thing, and we want to stop this trafficking, human trafficking, from occurring. And so I believe in solutions, right? We know the problem is so horrific, but sometimes we just don't know what tools to use as part of this solving the crime. So I'm excited today to be able to announce that John and I are co-founders of a startup for social purpose called Social Detective. And to me, I created this initiative because I felt like we needed to modernize the way we fight financial crime. And what we do through our AI-driven platform is to be able to give the practical tools to the financial institutions. For example, it's as a communications platform, right? How can we communicate in a much faster way, almost in real time, some of the work, to see the red flags of child trafficking or any crime. So our AI-driven platform, we help to detect the fraud and the the money laundering that occurs sometimes within our places. And so if we have the right tools in our hands, I believe we are much more equipped to be able to prevent this crime from happening to another child. Because I know in the financial institutions, we a lot of look at spreadsheets. But for me, I remember being that child and that the payment, that somebody paid for me to, and during the trafficking case. And often I feel like, what if we did have the financial institutions were able to step in the case of, in my own case, could we have stopped from me being, trafficked? Could we have identified that there were certain transactions that just didn't look right, especially when we see, numbers over and over again and different transactions and the patterns? So I believe today, when I created this initiative, Social Detective, and the web application, we now have the tool to be able to use real-time communications to be able to prevent before it's too late. So I'm excited that David, that you and FIBA are giving us this opportunity to be able to bring this forth as a vision we've had. And I'm so excited that John, with all his experience in law enforcement and working in fighting financial crimes, that he's able to join us. And I think together, we know we can be stronger together. And that's what the excitement of my new initiative is.
Well, that's great. And I'm going to come back to that because I think it'll be very interesting for our audience to understand exactly what the tool is, how it works, particularly with all of the talk, and we've had this now for several years, around using innovative technology to fight crime. So I'm going to come back to that. But, first, John, and, I keep saying longtime member of law enforcement, even though he's a young man, right? And we thank you for your service because it's important to have people like you out there that really have a passion for fighting against these horrific crimes. And you've seen a lot. I mean, you've seen some really terrible things out there. But when it comes to human trafficking, what are some of the challenges that you faced in combating human trafficking?
Yeah, I think some of them are the secrecy. Probably the biggest one is the secrecy that surrounds this. And when it comes to labor traffic specifically, it's even more secret because a lot of the individuals that are suffering from this crime are physically isolated from areas where other people can actually see what's happening, right? So when we compare the visibility of sex workers that may be being exploited versus laborers who are being exploited, obviously the work is happening in different places. The exploitation takes a different form. And so those complexities make these types of investigations difficult to initiate because they're difficult to it's difficult sometimes to uncover what is happening. The level of control that individuals have or that those being exploited, as much as we think that sex traffickers have a lot of control over the individuals they're exploiting, the labor traffickers, have a higher level of control because they're controlling everything from where they live to the groceries that they buy to where they sleep and how long they work. And they do this all outside of generally the public's view. So that secrecy is hard to crack. It takes a combination and collaboration between law enforcement and social service agencies NGOs, which requires a certain level of trust. And that then becomes the next challenge. So it's hard to find this, the activity. And it also takes a lot of effort to gain that trust, to build that trust, because law enforcement is seeing the world through one lens. NGOs can sometimes see the world, well, they're seeing it through their own lens, and those opposite lenses can find themselves at odds. So it really is a labor that has to be undertaken carefully. Everybody wants to do the right thing. The investigators want to do the right thing. The NGOs want to do the right thing, but it has to be done in a deliberate manner. And then ultimately, the biggest challenge that we have, to be completely honest, is prosecutorial support. These cases are not easy to make. When you're dealing with evidence that is living and breathing and suffers the traumas that some of these folks do, these are difficult people to deal with because they've dealt with some very difficult circumstances. And so across the country, that is the one area that we are really, really lacking, which is effective prosecution of the violators of this crime.
And that's concerning. And we've had this conversation before with other types of cases where you go out, you do the investigation, you do the legwork, and then you bring in the case to the prosecutors, and they are challenged with trying to carry them through to their final conclusion. So interesting, very interesting point. And again, I think it comes back to, as you said, we can't work in silos, right? This has to be done together. So, Rani, I want to come back to this social detective because, here it is, as I said, you, the victim survivor, John, the crime fighter, combining together to create this type of platform. And I am very focused on innovative technology and how much it can help. So tell us a little bit about how you built this platform. How does this innovative technology really help you, strengthen those efforts in fighting against these financial crimes?
Yes, with our anti-money laundering, AML, AI, it helps. So our platform is driven by utilizing today's modernized technologies that we have, using AI. And what we can do, what that platform can do is help financial institutions and those working every day, whether it's operations or other roles, to be able to do their job, faster, because traffickers are very fast when they are trafficking criminals. If we, the good citizens, are not able to keep up with that, then we're losing the fight, right? So I felt like that we needed to create the software in real time to be able to detect patterns, typologies, and what if with our UI interface, we're able to see, if there's a fraud case that's being reported by the Frontline, we're in the back end of a bank could see, hey, some of these things are coming in through the platform because it's a communications platform, right? And so through that, through our AI engine, we're able to help with transaction monitoring. We're able to even guide some help even on SAR reports. If, let's say, we get a new employee and they're not quite aware what the bank's policy is, our AI kind of helps because we're aligned with the bank's policy, and we help align and guiding, right, what to do and what does red flags look like. So I think from a technology point of view, our dashboard will absolutely help give us the information in real time in one platform, right? So we're not jumping to all different technologies. But I think, like you said, we can't work in silos. And so same thing within the bank, every employee and whether it's a fraud department or it's another department, we need to be able to communicate in real time, and our software can help guide that process.
Yeah, and if I can add, I mean, I think that the key aspects that this software, the key gap that it fills, and it's something that it's consistent, and you see it, is if you review all of the penalties and all of the indictments and all of the fines that have come out, not just from the US, from around the world, in terms of failures and deficiencies to an institution's AML systems, is the fact that information, even within the compliance realm, seems to be siloed. Some people have access to it, some people don't. And that opens all sorts of doors. And we saw it. We've seen insider threats be revealed through some of these indictments and some of these fines. And so this also brings some transparency in terms of the communications, not only to make sure that individuals do their part by initiating those reports, by flagging those transactions, by documenting that suspicious activity, but also that they are aware of their responsibilities now that they have done that, and also making those responsible down the line aware of the entire universe that is out there, so that when they're receiving an alert, when they're receiving a report, they're not doing it in a vacuum to say, this is one person, one transaction. This is, hold on, this is one person in this location, and these other transactions may or may not be related, right? It doesn't get rid of the need for human analysis of the information, but it makes all of these seemingly disparate instances available to that individual, who can then do that analysis and quickly be able to make those connections, or say, okay, this is not quite it, but I'm aware of it.
No, and that is something we've emphasized with innovative technology across the board. It doesn't replace that human sense of smell, shall we say. I mean, what you built up over years of being a law enforcement agent, just seeing and feeling and understanding that you can recognize a pattern. So while the technology can maybe put together all of that data that's being brought in from different sources, the person at the end of the day, the human, is the one who can look at it and say, yes, something wrong here. There's something suspicious here. And coming back to the idea of the red flags, because what we're seeing is obviously, and you mentioned the word transparency, which is always the big question and the big hurdle to overcome. And we know about, cash deposits below thresholds, shell companies, but now increasingly we're seeing the use of cryptocurrencies, digital assets, which makes this much more challenging. So, John, putting all of that together, what kind of red flags can we really be looking for at this point?
Well, look, I think it's more circumstantial behavior, right? Because when you look at some of these red flags, a lot of red flags seem to apply across a multitude of typologies. But again, it's all about how much information do you have to see how this low value deposit, what does that look like in context of everything else that you have, everything else that's going on, right? So it really is the type of information. In terms of what to look out for, part of the lesson here is that we have to not just restrict ourselves to saying, well, only if I see this will I then look into that particular, right? It's more case by case. It reinforces the need and the necessity of of KYC. And again, a lot of this is the basics, right? If we start thinking about doing something too complex, we cannot forget the basics. That's going to be, the foundation for everything we do. And so I think rather than talking about, well, if you see this, then that's definitely, a red flag or an indicator for human trafficking. I think, what I'd like to promulgate is to say, look, we need to make sure that we're able to properly interpret the behavior of our customer, and then be able to make that determination as to when it is out of the ordinary, because there are low value deposits may be completely within the profile of a customer. And so in and of itself, that's not enough to say that that's some kind of suspicious behavior.
Excellent point. And again, it comes back to the same thing. How do you overcome the challenges of the criminals using this type of innovative technology against us? And it comes back to the basics, right? Good old fashioned know your customer. So Ronnie and John remembers a couple of years back, we had the Super Bowl in Miami. And I remember riding the train, the Metro Rail, the people mover that gets you around downtown. Getting off, there were always these flyers, and basically focused on human trafficking, because they say that around big events like this is where you see really this type of activity. Maybe you can speak to that a little bit, because I thought it was just interesting, and I saw these flyers everywhere. So didn't really see a lot about it on television. Don't see a lot about it in the newspapers unless a case or a prosecution happens. Yet here we have this big sporting event, and there are flyers put up all over the place.
Yeah, and so we need to educate our communities about what does human trafficking look like. And oftentimes, we're just going to the big event. We're focusing on the big event, and we don't always see, behind the scenes of sometimes criminal activity happening. Not now, we all know not every event is going to have all that, but the bigger the events are, the higher the risk is, right? And when human trafficking as a business, traffickers are seeing it as a business. So they look at locations and places and people where they can exploit. Like I think John said before, the low risks. And and I think that's why we need to come up with, again, innovative technology. So later down the road, we're going to be able to do some things on our mobile phones to be able to see something, say something. And we're going to be able to get that in the right hands of law enforcement at some point, right? And I think those are the ways that we want to move forward. So as a everyday citizen going to events, traveling to other countries and such, we're going to be able to have that tool, I hope ideally in our pockets through the cell phone, through a mobile phone, to be able to communicate to help prevent crime. When from a financial institution, when you stop a suspicious transaction, it's not just saving dollars, but really saving a child's life, right? Because I was that child that was being moved around and trafficked for forced labor and adoption rings and such. And so imagine if we looked at the financial portion of it, the financial flow, and if a bank employee or anyone in the, they're able to rescue, they would be able to see those unusual transactions, like the red flags we talked about. And so I just encourage your audience, to remember, every payment has a story. What was that purchase? And so I'm here to say, and to encourage them to look at it with the help of our AI-driven platform, to be able to hear that cry of maybe possibly of a child that was trafficked, but it came through data, right? It wasn't obviously a verbal cry for help, but the transactions can tell us a story. And those, if we see the red flags, let's dig a little deeper, go behind the scenes and do our research more with additional help. And together, that's how we can help prevent this crime from happening.
And David, when it comes to the big events, I think, again, everybody's mind goes to sexual exploitation. However, we have in the US in the next couple of years, we have two very, very big events coming. We have the World Cup coming to North America, where Miami, I believe, is going to be one of the locations. We also have potentially the Olympics, I believe, are going to be in LA. I can tell you that is where to look for exploitation, because there's going to be a need for businesses to get contracts from the government, from the Olympic Committee, to build stadiums, to renovate stadiums, all of this. That is where you look for exploitation. I am a lifelong soccer fan. I root for Colombia every 4 years to get in. If they're in, I root for them in the World Cup. But I can tell you the other thing that people can do is be more cognizant. I decided I wasn't going to watch a World Cup when it was in Qatar. Number one, it was in the winter, ridiculous. Number two, did not feel comfortable cheering for a sporting event where I knew that people, because it was well documented, were exploited and people died. People were, made to work in ridiculous heat just to get these stadiums built and all of these, these venues completed. I took it upon myself to say I'm not watching. It hurt me because everybody around me was watching and everybody was like, we're having a World Cup party. I said, I can't do it. So the other thing that people can do, and this is going beyond financial institutions, is take a personal stand. Was FIFA hurt by the fact that John Tobon did not watch the World Cup? No, they could care less. But you know what? John Tobon feels a little bit better about himself to say, you know what? This is more important to me than watching a sporting event and being able to hang out with some friends. I can hang out with them anytime. And I think, going to some of that, what we can do as individuals to raise that awareness. Because people are going to ask you, hey, how come you're not coming over to the soccer game? Well, this is why. And that's it. And you've done your part.
Excellent point. And having principles can sometimes be costly, right? And it's on, not that it's unfortunate, because it's something that more people absolutely have to do, and you just hope that it catches on and more people understand what's really behind this. And Rani, I think, you above everyone can really explain what is behind this. And just, one final thought, Rani. What does happen to the victims? How can you help the victims? What can be done for them once this horrible crime is uncovered?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, one of the things that your audience can absolutely help, as we know, financial institutions are in the front lines, right? And so, and because traffickers can hide a child, so in my own case, they try to hide me and hide the evidence and such. But we know that they can't always hide the money. So I think for us to be able to look for the ways that in our particular job, or whether it's personal life, what is it that we can do to move the needle forward? Because that's what I was crying for, at a young age when I didn't have my family, and then when the traffickers exploited me. So I think the financial institutions and others, as the frontline defenders, right? We thought we were talking about defending. What you can do is, one, like John mentioned, just make those personal choices. I'm going to say something. If I see something that doesn't look right, I'm going to look deeper. So as an encouragement, we all can do something. I think it's just choosing what is it that with your particular skill set, your audience's particular skill set, how can they use that to help fight financial crime and to save potentially another child's life.
And John, what happens to the victims? I mean, you've been in these cases. You've managed to, say, break up a ring, or at least interrupt it, disrupt it. What happens to the victims?
It's the results are a pretty wide range. You know, getting individuals and helping them become survivors really is a task and a responsibility, far beyond law enforcement, right? And this is where that collaboration really comes into play with social service agencies, NGOs, and financial institutions. Depending on the type of trafficking that individuals are involved in, financial institutions can do a lot. They can help individuals recover their credit rating. They can help individuals by promoting loans for startups, small businesses that are funded by individuals that are survivors. And so there's lots of different things that can happen. I think, from the law enforcement perspective, our goal has always been, let's bring justice, but that's really all we can do, right? That's our little slice of the pie, if you will. That's what we're responsible for, bringing justice. And so what has happened within law enforcement within the last probably 10 or 15 years is that collective responsibility is more at the center. So that we say, okay, we're going to put a multidisciplinary team together where we will handle the justice part, and we are going to let others within that community, within that team, make sure that they're there to, for mental health, for financial stability, for educational needs and requirements, all of these different things. And so what happens to victims and how do we, help them become survivors? The answer to that question is it depends on how much we are able to work together, identify that team, and deliver those opportunities for those individuals who will then be there to use them as a springboard to the next phase of their life.
Excellent. Excellent points. Really, at the end of the day, and I think that's what people have to understand, this is a human crime. Okay. This is a crime against humanity, whether it's sexual exploitation or forced labor. Either way, it is a crime against humanity. And I think, we've heard some really fantastic thoughts here. Particularly, I think this is just a great collaboration. We talk about the fact that we need collaboration between banks, between law enforcement, between NGOs. And I think, with the two of you, this is like the first step, right? A victim survivor and law enforcement. This type of combination obviously not just brings the history, right? The knowledge of the crime, having either lived it or fought against it, but the ideas, because we do need ideas. We're always looking for new ideas. And, I think, obviously, as I said before, innovative technology is absolutely the way to go because it can analyze data faster. It can recognize patterns much quicker. It can take data from all these different sources and put it in your hands for you to look at it and say, yeah, I recognize this and we need to move on this. As Rani, I think you said a few times, quickly. We need to communicate faster. And as John said, we've got to get our court system, legal system, whatever it is, to be more involved. They take it seriously, but sometimes you have to take a chance, right? Not every case is perfect, but I think the more you bring these cases up, whether you win or you lose, the more you put pressure on these criminals. And I think lastly, for me, the basics. Whether it's sports, no matter what it is, if you're good at the basics, that's going to help you. And, no matter how often we come back saying, KYC, know your customer, know your customer, know your customer. That's typically, as John pointed out, where these failures take place, because that will make it a lot easier to recognize, as John said, when something is out of the ordinary. So this has been really great conversation. Appreciate you sharing your expertise with the audience. Thank you, Rani, John. Keep fighting that good fight. Best of luck with Social Detective. I'm really interested to see, how it takes off, because, we've been seeing forever, platforms, machine learning, artificial intelligence for monitoring, transactions, et cetera, but not with this particular focus. So I wish you all the best, and we'll do this again, because I think it's important to get another update and hear how it's going.
Awesome. Thank you, David. Always a pleasure.
Great. Thank you, David. It was great connecting, and thank you for sharing with your audience.
Thank you for joining us in this new episode of The Force. Write to us at marketingfiba@fiba.net and send us the topics you would like us to cover in our next episodes. For more information on the benefits and value of being a FIBA member, visit us at www.fiba.net.